Oh, y'all wanted a twist, eh?
The prime goal of government is to protect the minority of the opulent from the majority. And in order to do that, you've got to fragment the majority so they really can't get together and do very much. And you have to concentrate power in the wealth of the nation.
What's the use of a gun if you don't have your finger on the trigger? What's the use of a gun if you don't have your finger on the trigger?
Good afternoon, I'm Michael Malice, and let that be your welcome for the next hour plus. We are making history today. We have as my guests two good friends of mine. Let me give the long intro. We have Matt Welch, former editor-in-chief of Reason, currently editor-at-large at Reason, co-author with Nick Gillespie of the Declaration of Independence, co-host of We the Fifth podcast. Did I miss anything?
Yeah, the Reason podcast too.
And the Reason podcast, and also you authored that book on John McCain, the real...
Myth of the Maverick.
Myth of the Maverick. Then we have Tom Woods, host of The Tom Woods Show, your daily dose of libertarian education, author of, 7 books?
You're just trolling me now.
Now, how many books?
It's 12.
Is it really 12?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Counting the ebooks?
I'll send you some. Counting the ebooks, probably about 112.
Okay, I honestly thought it was... Okay.
Oh, yeah, no, I'll mail you some more. Whatever you're missing in your collection, I'll mail.
How the Catholic Church Saved Western Civilization, breakdown,
You're making stuff up. No, I'll tell you. Politically Incorrect Guide to American History.
That's
is
the big one.
That created the controversy. around it.
Senior fellow at the Mises Institute.
That is correct.
So now let me explain to the listeners why this is such a big deal. For everyone thinks that every movement outside their own is all unified and everyone gets along, whereas in reality, human beings define ourselves by opposition, and there's always schisms or schisms, however you pronounce it. That's one of the things that divides people, the pronunciation of that word. And people end up fighting what to outsiders seem like minor deals, but to those within the community actually seem like big deals, right? So this has been the case from libertarianism from the beginning, at the very least since the 1940s, when Ayn Rand wrote a letter to Leonard Read, head of FEE, in all caps, meaning she was holding on the shift key on her typewriter, saying that Milton Friedman and George Stigler were Stalinists for endorsing an article talking about the pros and cons of rent control. So Tom comes from the Murray Rothbard school, Rothbardianism and anarcho-capitalism. Matt comes from what, I mean, the more mainstream, the derogatory term they say is Beltway libertarianism, because you're actually trying to affect change in Washington, whereas Tom's mode of thought is let's burn it all down. These people are hopeless. And in fact, Murray Rothbard once wrote an essay called Do You Hate the State? And the question is, if there was a button to destroy the government, would you press it so hard your finger would blister? And Tom would be yes, and Matt, I think, would be like, well, let's hold on a minute. Let's just, if we destroy everything...
I'd at least think about it.
You would at least think about it. So that is a fundamental difference. Now, historically, also, there have been accusations from these two wings, and not from you guys personally. I want to make that very, very clear. Tom comes from the whole Ron Paul wing, and the accusation there is like these people attract racists and they're crypto fascists, whereas the other accusation toward the Reason School and Cato and places like that is you guys are appeasers from the state. You are basically giving up the game before it's even started, and what do you have to show for it in the long term? Is that a fair assessment historically?
Good enough for me.
Yeah, more or less.
So you have never met.
Correct.
I have defended Reason on Tom's show. Matt has seen me defend Tom at length to the current Libertarian Party chairman, Nicholas Sarwark. And there was a big controversy within the Libertarian Party, which is Nicholas Sarwark, the new head of the LP. They ran Gary Johnson, former governor of New Mexico, twice. They're thinking of running Bill Weld in 2020. And he said his position is we have to drive the Tom Woods people out of the party. And
is that a quote?
Yes, almost verbatim.
Okay.
Basically, he
he said when Jason Stapleton defended me, Jason's another podcaster, he said more or less, well, I'm not sure your audience is necessarily the people we're trying to attract. So he did go after Jason, and Jason is not even as hardcore as I am.
He's a conservative.
So I think through the transitive property, he was saying that about
No,
that.
he said that to me, to my face.
Okay.
Yeah, and basically his idea is like he wanted to build a moat around these toxic people. And the point I made is, well, I'll defend him a little bit. it is, I can understand the appropriateness of driving out so-called racists from a movement, right? But there's two types of racists. There's racist people who are prejudiced, and there's racists is that people I don't like. And that's how leftists use that term very frequently. I'm sure you get called a racist on Twitter all the time, Matt, just because
Not
of
all
your...
the time.
But enough.
It's
that-
happened.
Yeah,
It's probably
yeah.
happened.
So both of you, Matt, you wrote a piece about the recent Libertarian convention. There was a group called the Mises Caucus, which comes from like the Tom Woods school, which tried to get people elected into the Libertarian Party committee. Successfully. And both you and Tom reached out. It's like, hey, let's... Tom was like, this is a very fair piece from Reason. I'm like, let's reach out and talk, because there's no reason, in my view, for a movement that, and I'm sure you guys agree, obviously you're here, for a movement that's so guided by individualism that even if each of you might hate certain specific people, or I don't want to say hate, or not feel comfortable with, on a personal level, you two are hardly the bad guys of each wing.
Well, I won't say that I'm not the bad guy here. Just
Okay.
don't want to rule it out.
I'm the villain. I mean, you can't have that. I'm a comic book supervillain.
Understood. I think one way to maybe broaden it out even to more interest to people who don't give a crap necessarily about intra-libertarian disputes. I find it fascinating, and maybe you do too, Tom. That Sarwark, I think, kind of picked a fight with Tom and some people around Mises 1 year ago. It was a post Charlottesville. Kind of fracas that happened, a Twitter spat then. I think there was a large, common, let's say, sense among broadly the libertarian institutions that in our overgeneralized kind of sense were sort of on this team instead of that team. Like, oh my God, there's this pipeline problem. There's a pipeline between libertarianism and the alt-right. We need to do something about it. I think that was kind of an overreaction among a lot of people, not just Sarwark, who I'm fond of in many respects. I think in other libertarian organizations, I've seen people like, "What do we got? We need to do something. Let's have a meeting. Let's talk about this." And I think that it was kind of an overreaction to that moment. I'm not sure there's a really big pipeline there. In the LP specifically, there's a couple of state parties in which people who are classifiable as white nationalists or pretty close to it were coming in and causing controversy. There's a guy named Augustus Invictus, probably not his birth name.
I interviewed him at Charlottesville. He had a goat slaying ceremony. He was on. It was the first time in history, I believe, where there was a Libertarian Party primary, because usually they're just desperate to have someone to put up. He was running for the nomination for Senate from Florida, and they're like, "Oh no, we're not doing this."
And he got bounced.
So
there was,
and he was also Christopher Cantwell's power of attorney. He was.
I didn't.
Yes.
Maybe I knew that or I forgot that. But anyway, so there was a couple of occasions just within the LP where it felt like, hey, we got to. I'm presuming that they felt like we have to do something about this. I think in general there was a sense of overreaction to that moment, and I think that there's traditionally been, and I say this to someone who comes to the word libertarian even after I started working for Reason. Like when Nick Gillespie first hired me, he asked me to describe my politics, and because I'm such a special flower, I refused to say that I was libertarian. Right. So I feel like as a latecomer, as an outsider, as someone who didn't get here through philosophy and reading Hayek or anything like that, it's not my path. I have felt like longtime libertarians are way too insecure about the word, about the movement, about everything, and they're always kind of paranoid about things. I remember talking to people before we came up with the final subtitle of our book in 2011. Should we include the word libertarian in the subtitle? Right. And I was with a bunch of longtime libertarian hands, and they're like, "Oh God, no! That word drives people nuts." And as an outsider and kind of latecomer, I'm like, "Dude, embrace it. It's great. It's a great word. It's a big word. It doesn't come with a lot of baggage, and you can't be so paranoid that if a couple of people who have described themselves as libertarian turn out to be awful, that doesn't mean that you have to draw a gigantic either a moat around those people or come up with a huge strategy to sort of deal with it. Every grouping of people, and especially every kind of marginalized group. And let's, I think, be honest about it. Libertarians are marginal. We're in the discourse. It's going to attract some marginal people. It's kind of part of the attractiveness of it. Have some self-confidence that you don't have to overreact when some weirdos come around.
Well, I'm going to play devil's advocate and ask Tom this question, because I think there is something to this pipeline problem, and it's this. If you are a philosophy that rejects what we're preached as the narrative of, the status quo, I hate using science metaphors outside of science, but nature abhors a vacuum, right? So if you're going to repudiate what we've been taught in school, something has to fill it. And necessarily, if you're going to be filling with radicalism, you're going to have so-called the bad types of radicals. So do you think, Tom, that there is this sort of pipeline problem that once you repudiate the status quo, you're going to attract maybe certain types of people that you wouldn't want to?
Well, as somebody who belongs to many marginal causes,
Yeah.
I've seen, for example, within the Catholic Church, I'm an old traditional Latin Mass guy because I cannot sit through a traditional or a typical parish Mass these days with the liturgical dancing and drums in the sanctuary and laymen all over the place. I mean,
I hate those laymen.
my thoughts. Yeah, no, I want
Garbage people.
No, sit in your seat and shut up. I'm not
Yeah.
interested in listening to
Yeah.
Mr. Jones. Shut up. So there are a lot of very cultured, sophisticated people who are part of that movement for obvious reasons. But then there are people who just don't get along with anybody. They're always the weirdo. And they just tend to latch on to weirdo causes because they think, well, these people can't reject me. There are so many oddball outliers in this group. Maybe these can be my friends. So you come across this a lot. So certainly that's going to be true in the libertarian movement. And it's true. I would not want to deal with this kind of problem as chairman of the Libertarian Party. I mean, mainly it's up to the state parties to deal with these things, precisely
Typical
because the chairman,
Jeffersonian. It's always the states with you people.
but the chairman can't vet everybody. And so naturally it is up to the state parties. And I think the Florida State Party did the best they could in that situation. But yeah, I get that. I get that he's facing a genuine issue that's not a made-up issue. But now, I know there's not going to be any disagreement on this, but I have to say it for the record. The way he treated me was really not acceptable.
Right.
Because the way it got started wasn't that he just suddenly out of the blue said, hey, Woods, you really better help me out here because we got a lot of crazy people coming in and I think you're responsible or something. I have nothing to do with these people. These people can't stand me. But it was that I posted some innocuous thing, something like what I learned from Murray Rothbard. And it wasn't like I learned, it was mostly things about how to live as a scholar. Like Rothbard would go to some obscure conference. It wasn't even a libertarian conference, just because he wanted a copy of all the papers so he could go home and see if there were any hidden gems in any of them. Or he would work with people on the New Left on a book. Like he co-edited a great book on the war in Leviathan State, and that was great. He did that with a guy on the left, Ronald Radosh, before he became a neoconservative. And I thought that's a good example of somebody who just he's searching for
putting in the work.
Yeah, right. But he just wants to find anybody who has an inkling of interest in what he's doing and try and see if they could work together, find common ground. That's not the usual portrayal of Rothbard, but that is how he lived his scholarly life. And I thought, I something I can learn from this because I have a tendency to want to be very insular. But instead, under his inspiration, I have reached out to people who are quite different from me and done a lot of projects with them. Well, anyway, so I posted that.
Including myself.
Michael Malice, indeed. So Sarwark's response was, he obviously didn't listen to a word I said. He just saw that I posted Rothbard, and we all know that means evil. So he responded with, that moment when the only thing you learned from Rothbard was the worst political strategy ever. Now, I had said nothing about politics. So he was just starting with me for no reason to attack me and Rothbard for just no reason. Right. So it wasn't like, listen, we have a messaging problem after Charlottesville. It was just, I'm going to kick sand in your face because I can. Now, there's no reason for that.
Yeah, so what are your thoughts? I mean, and that is kind of, I think, a low blow, especially for people who haven't. I'm not asking you to defend Nicholas Sarwark, but I mean, that's not how you comport yourself, Matt, at all.
That's not a choice that I would have made.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I have, and we and I have talked about this both publicly and privately. I'm not the world's biggest fan of Murray Rothbard's politics or his political strategizing at various points in his life. And this kind of rhetorical pugilism. Sure. I separate this from his work as an economic historian, mostly because I actually haven't read much of that stuff, but also because people who I respect a lot say that work is scintillating and great. And I respect what people who are smart tell me about things. But Rothbard was a columnist for Reason Magazine for 15 years. Yeah. This is one thing. I mean, Dave Weigel had a piece that was pretty interesting in the Washington Post 2 days ago, kind of talking about libertarians in the age of Trump, and Justin Amash was kind of the lead character of it. And again, it was sort of oversimplifying the kind of paleo versus Cosmo split, and now Amash is, according to the framing on Team Cosmo. I think all of that is kind of it's a useful frame, but it's also elides a lot of crossover and things that blend. Rothbard, again, was a columnist for 15 years for Reason magazine. You go and look at the archives here. We published our first piece from Ron Paul, I think, in 1980.
Yeah.
When I became editor in 2008, and even before, I was appointed in 2007. Probably the first piece that I commissioned was a cover story by Brian Doherty, a very celebratory cover story about the Ron Paul Revolution. And part of my theory coming into the editorship of the magazine was let's cover libertarianism a lot more. Reason made a choice, and it was a good one in the early 1970s. And it's part of the reason why I kind of understand and associate myself with the magazine, because it's similar to kind of choices that I would make too. But they had a Libertarian Party newsletter because the party started in 71. And so they had kind of a newsletter or a section within the magazine that sort of talked about all the disputes with it. And of course, because they're libertarians, everyone just wanted to fight each other and punch each other in the face constantly, all 7 people who were part of the party. And so they kind of had a conscious decision. Are we going to be an outreach magazine? Are we going to try to talk to the world as it is from a libertarian perspective, but knowing that maybe most of our audience even, or at least a lot of an important sector of the audience, are not going to agree with us to begin with? Or are we going to be kind of an intra-libertarian thing? And they chose the former as an approach. So when I became editor, part of my philosophy of it was like, okay, that was great. It was a great decision, but libertarianism has grown. Like, it's getting everywhere. And for me, Ron Paul, and this remains true, and I'm sure it's true for the two of you, probably more than me, but probably not by much. If you meet a libertarian under the age of 40 and ask them, how'd you get there? Most of them will say Ron Paul.
Yes.
It's not like, 12%. It's going to be 53% of them. I mean, the reason we have a DC office.
And Brian Doherty wrote a book about Ron Paul's presidential campaign.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, Brian Doherty wrote a history of libertarianism, and Brian, who I think he would not blanch at me describing him as a Rothbardian. I mean, Jesse Walker, our books.
And also a great guy, just for people listening. Brian Doherty, like, everyone likes him.
I mean, everyone, that's, again, a strong word, but
okay, everyone loves
People
him.
on all sides, let's say.
Yeah.
Jesse Walker, our books editor, is like the world's biggest fan of Bill Kaufman. I mean, the sort of
I don't even know who that is. I'm not kidding.
Oh, he's awesome. We'll tell you about him later.
yeah, actually, Tom.
I mentioned him in my speech.
Yeah, which was great. He's like a localist. And he's up in upstate New York.
And like Matt, he's hard to pigeonhole.
Okay.
Which is what I like about him too.
We learn how to be slippery from an early age.
Yeah,
so,
just like me in yeshiva.
Point that I want to make out of this is that I think, and it's one of the reasons why I'm really interested when I bounced out of the editorship. Part of the reason why I did it, because I believe in term limits at magazines. You get too conservative over time with your choices, but also, that decision was made right at the moment that Trump secured the nomination, more or less, by winning Indiana.
Yeah.
Suddenly, there was this influx of interest. We saw it on Google searches and elsewhere of like Gary Johnson, Libertarian Party, and people just sort of like in our universe were like, hey, should we pay attention to this thing that we've ignored for the last 4 decades in like a massive way? So thought, okay, maybe cover this stuff. We were looking for a political reporter who could do it, and like, why don't I make that me here? I think it's with the sort of, and sorry for filibustering, but the kind of modern history of sort of the Tea Party and liberty movement kind of politics, which is mostly fizzled out right now. It's interesting that a lot of that energy is kind of tilting, or seems to maybe preliminarily be tilting towards the LP, and the fact that Tom's, doubling down into that. I mean, talk about the great irony of this. I mean, Sarwark picks a fight with those guys a year ago, and now what's happening? Tom Woods, Dave Smith, they're pouring into the party. The Mises Caucus is the biggest kind of growing faction there. They have to figure out how to fight and how to work the levers. But it's an interesting thing that people are flooding into this tent right now and having the good arguments about where things should go. And those are really interesting to cover and to kind of grapple with. And the questions don't answer themselves easily.
Yeah, there's this idea of intellectual purity, which in real life doesn't actually apply. Like your co-host, my good friend Camille Foster, he's a hardcore Rothbardian. He's got Michael Malice tattooed on his forearm. So the idea that these groups can't talk to each other, I think, is absurd.
Or that they don't.
Don't. Yeah. But I mean, well, you were going to say something.
Can I jump in? I want to make
course.
this a little juicier, okay. At this moment, by mentioning a few names, if that's all right.
Sure.
Okay? And not in a negative
You're going to
light.
name names, okay.
I want to point out that in the past, I've been doing my best to try to extend an olive branch to people who, let's just say either as individuals or institutionally haven't always been so kind to me.
Well, and let me interject here with one point, which
Yeah.
is when I was having this discussion with Nicholas Sarwalk, I said, if you are going to be of the belief that Tom and the Mises people are these crypto Klansmen, they never talk about race one way or another. So they're not doing a good job of it if that's what you think they're secretly trying to get.
But
And that's what really bothered me. But go
Even
ahead.
leaving, and I appreciate that, but even leaving that to the side, for example, I had, when I used to host the Peter Schiff show as a fill-in host, I had Jacob Sullum on there. I've had Brian Doherty on. I've had Jim Epstein on. I've had people in the Reason orbit on the show. I've had people who are well outside the Mises Institute orbit, like Deirdre McCloskey, and I can go down, Don Boudreau and a lot of the GMU people. I've had all these people on. Now, sometimes that's reciprocated, but not a whole lot. And not like I sit and nurse old grievances. If all I did was nurse old grievances, I would accomplish nothing, because heaven knows I have a lot of grievances.
Yeah.
But
It's Festivus every day with you.
I actually remember, because this I just thought was bizarre. We were at, I think it was Freedom Fest, maybe 2011, and a guy named Jimmy Morrison, who had worked on the Gary Johnson campaign, was in the process of creating, he's now finished them finally, but a couple of documentary films, one about the housing bubble and one about just the financial crisis more generally, and trying to explain that there is a free market accounting of this, that this is the conventional wisdom, that this was deregulation. I mean, this is not, can't be reconciled with the evidence. And I had written a New York Times best-selling book on this subject, so I knew a little bit about it. So he was working on this project. He went over and he wanted to see if Reason TV would at least sit down and do an interview with him, because he's doing they're just sitting there, and it's Freedom Fest, and he's doing this documentary. And they weren't interested, and it was almost certainly because of my involvement. So then he went over and physically, bodily brought Gary Johnson himself, the superstar of the Reason universe, over to vouch for the whole project, because Gary Johnson was a big backer of the project. And they still refused even. Now, I'm not saying that any one of us has a right to an interview, but I am saying that it's likely that if that had been anybody else in the libertarian world, it would have happened. So,
I would dispute that, actually.
Okay, well, maybe so, but my point is that happened to me, but my thought was, I know there are decent people in this universe, and I'm not going to let that stop me from reaching out to them. So I have been trying in my way to not just confine myself to my normal orbit, but to in fact say, I know there are good people who work at the Cato Institute, particularly the foreign policy people. They're great. I don't want to be isolated from any good person anywhere. That's my attitude.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I was actually part of that 2011 team, but I have been in the past at Freedom Fest. Thankfully, not so much this year. Although I did interview your friend Bill Weld when I was there, but this year. But in the past,
What was Bill Well doing in an event about freedom?
That's very funny.
Yeah.
Well, it's Freedom Fest, so
That's not nice, Mark Skousen. I hope you're not listening.
Mark Skousen's a great friend. No,
Same with me.
But no, Reason TV would interview 30 people there, and would just be on a completely harried schedule. And it's totally possible that great people came in and said, "Why don't you interview me about this great project?" And there was a glazed look in her eyes, and my God, I got to go get Thomas Massey in 5 seconds here.
I totally get that. So that's what I'm saying. I don't want it to give the impression that I'm some petulant child who feels entitled to special treatment or anything like that. But I feel like, for example, when I had Jim Epstein on, because Gene is a good friend, and
Who runs the Soho Forum.
right, and Gene used to be with Barron's, as you know, just for the audience,
And his son, Jim Epstein, works for
his
Reason.
son works for Reason, and
I
I
love
said,
these intergenerational.
Yeah.
One's an Austrian, so the other one becomes a Chicagoan.
Well,
We've seen a lot of this.
It's like
pretty funny.
Milton Friedman's son is Milton Friedman was not an anarchist. His son, David Friedman, is one of the big anarcho-capitalists, and his grandson, Patrick Friedman, is behind seasteading, which is making cities in the ocean. So who knows what the next generation is going to be.
But I remember saying to Gene, look, I would love to have Jim on the show. That'd be great. He's a great guy, very smart. But there'd have to be some kind of reciprocity. Reason would have to at least link to the episode or something. And Gene said, Tom, I find it impossible to believe that they would not link to your episode. And I think they wound up doing it. But I said, Gene, I find a lot of things impossible to believe that in fact happen every day. So look, I don't like everything that Reason publishes, and I
believe that's true.
And I'm critical of Reason when sometimes there are just mind-boggling things that I see.
Wait, what was that essay that Peter? I tore this apart in my show. What was that essay Peter Studerman just did about Mitch Daniels?
If only
should have been
Mitch
president?
Daniels could have been our
Was that a
president.
joke?
No, it's not a joke. I mean, it's a. I mean, it was. I thought the tongue was a little bit in cheek of it, but compared to where the Republican Party has gone on issues of caring about spending.
Okay. Oh, okay. That's a very fair point.
That's it.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
okay. That's
Mitch
very
Daniels.
valid.
Mitch Daniels in 2011 or 2007, when last time he was a viable anything, he's like, let's stop talking about social issues. Let's deal with the long-term fiscal nightmare and start dealing with it now in kind of a sober fashion. I think that there's value in that
Sure.
approach.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Go ahead. You were saying, Tom.
Well, anyway, I'm just saying, I'm not saying that I'm without fault. There are things I've said, like even in that exchange with Sarwark, I look back on that and I think, all right, some of that was a little juvenile on my part.
Nothing wrong with that.
A little bit caught up in the heat of things, but my point is that I think I've been about as reasonable as I could be expected to be under the circumstances, given that my history with reason was, particularly with Kathy Young, your friend, has not been pleasant. I think I've been as accommodating to your folks as could reasonably be expected of me. Just saying for the record, for what it's worth.
Well, the reason you're here is because you thought Matt's article about you was fair. And I
thought it was the nicest things that had ever been said about me in that magazine.
Which doesn't mean that he thinks it was fair. Let's be clear about that.
Yeah. BetDSI has been in business for over 20 years, paying winners. They're top rated on sportsbook review sites. They've got an easy-to-use mobile playing interface. You play, you win, you get paid. BetDSI has a great mobile app. It's easy to use from anywhere, and they offer live in-game wagering. You can make plays throughout the entire games and events, and they offer odds on pretty much everything else, too. BetDSI includes all major sports, politics, reality TV, pretty much anything. I recommend BetDSI if you want to add a little excitement to the games you're watching. You don't like sports? That's okay. This is how you have fun watching the PGA Tour and have the funnest workday of your life. Major League Baseball, that's another one that you can bet on. If you go to BetDSI and use promo code WELCOME100, you get a 200% bonus on your initial deposit. That's free money, people. Go to betdsi.com and use promo code WELCOME100. But this is a perfect segue because I wanted to talk about the Cato Institute and David Bose, and this kind of speaks to what you guys were saying.
Okay.
Relax. It's on topic, I promise. Our buddy Todd Stevie wrote a book called Libertarianism for Beginners. If the title doesn't tell everyone what it is, it's like if you don't know literally anything about libertarianism, this describes it from...
I like that book.
Yeah. It talks about the movements. It talks about the history. It talks about the ideas. David Bose, who's the executive vice president of the Cato Institute. I was a Cato intern. I looked up to him enormously. Cato has Murray Rothbard hanging on their wall in their Hall of Fame. Murray Rothbard co-founded the Cato Institute. He basically told Todd, and Todd was very vituperative, and I'm not going to quote Todd's vituperation. This was on a Facebook thread. That here's the exact quote. I'm going to read it verbatim. He's talking about the book. He goes, search for racist in the book. You'll find more than one paragraph. And we're not talking alt-right. We're talking about an organization that has a big presence on the web and in your book. So he's alluding to the Mises Institute, which Tom's associated with, without using the name, right? Which to me is, I don't like that. It's like, if you're going to call him out, call him out. Like, everyone knows what you mean. And he goes, as you'll recall, when I read your manuscript, I told you, open quote, I see the attempt to conflate Austrian economics and libertarianism with racism as a potentially fatal cancer on the libertarian idea. You seem to see it as just another approach, along with objectivism, anarcho-capitalism, and minimal state libertarianism. People who try to graft the reprehensible ideas onto the idea of liberty should either be confronted or ignored in the hope that decent people won't notice them. You put them front and center in one big happy family. We just talked a little bit before the show. I don't understand how, if there is a group that identifies as libertarian, and by his own words, they're a big presence on the web in the movement, if you're writing a book about libertarianism for beginners, you can just ignore them or confront them. Because as an author of a book like that, your point is to be value judgment and say, if I'm writing a book of the Democratic Party, I have to talk about the Democratic Socialists and I have to talk about the Democrats, and it's not my place to say, Bernie Sanders is a commie. It's like, these are their views and you have to take them at face value. So
we had a paragraph or two in the Declaration of Independence in 2011, just kind of libertarianism for beginners. Here's this thing, and named groups, and we had the same, moment. You have to decide which groups to name,
right?
And I didn't hesitate to talk about the Mises Institute there because just in a similar way. That you wouldn't hesitate to talk about Ron Paul.
Sure.
And in fact, and again, we were talking about this earlier. So when the the Ron Paul newsletters got rediscovered in 2008 by Jamie Kirchick and Big Kerfuffle. They had actually been sort of talked about a lot in 1996 when he went back to Congress. We wrote a lot about, we sort of did investigative stuff because our readers were interested. But there was this sense by a lot of people, longtime libertarian people, more in the kind of Washington crowd, of like, see, Ron Paul is just not a libertarian. This shows it. He's part of that crowd. There's sort of an aura, a patina of neo-Confederism around it. And I wrote at the time, and again, my first editor's note as editor of the magazine, the headline was "Ron Paul's Mistake." I did not shy away from discussing the paleo-libertarianism strategy, which I thought was a bad moment at all. And every time I'm attacked by my ANCAP friends, it's usually along those lines, like, "Oh, you're just trying to talk about the newsletters." But actually, in the moment, I said to try to use the.
Why don't you explain to people what these newsletters are?
No. Why did you use Google?
Yeah, really. Really.
Seriously, like
Okay.
It's weird history. It's
Yes.
bad. Google the newsletters. Google my name on it. Google Tom's if he's written about it. Fine, and duke it out there. I don't want to waste 25 minutes. But I thought it was an error then. Like there was, again, it goes to this sense of insecurity. Like, well, now that there will be people who associate libertarianism with Ron Paul and that with racism, we have to kind of like edit that out of the movement. And that's not, you're editing your nose off of your face. That's not, grapple with it honestly, deal with it, engage with it, all the kind of warts and all history of everything, including everything that I do or we do, and not that I'm important, but like that other figures, Milton Friedman does,
Well, and you've talked about your past support for the Iraq War. This was a mistake.
I did not support the Iraq War.
Afghanistan?
I supported the taking out of the regime that sheltered the Taliban and then getting home. That's
sure.
it. Before, the thing to hit me on is my support for the Yugoslav wars in the 90s.
Okay.
That's
I'm not trying to hit you, but the point is there have been views that you've changed over the past. You're like, I shouldn't have thought that at the time.
Sure.
So
I used to think that campaign finance reform was a very important issue. That's
yeah.
probably that and interventionism are probably the ways that I've changed the most after hanging around libertarians. But so it's that sense of like, let's try to edit this thing out because we don't like it or it's uncomfortable. I just think that leads you to a place of inaccuracy. And again, I come out of this from a journalistic point of view. So if we're just going to talk about the thing that has an L associated with it, it's inaccurate.
Right.
To pretend that Tom Woods doesn't exist or that the Mises Institute doesn't exist or that Ron Paul doesn't exist. If there is a bunch of gross, disgusting things in the closet, great, write about it, investigate it, see what's going on. And also, very importantly, see if that's important. See if that's what's motivating people right now.
Right.
If that's what's lighting a fire. That was the thing about, the Ron Paul revolution in 2007, 2008. Was that about like making jokes about Martin Luther King and like whatever stuff was in the late 80s? No, it was about love.
Yes.
It was about love and ending the Fed and ending the warfare state and this kind of stuff. So it wasn't an accurate snapshot. So if you want to be accurate about what the stuff is, you can't, I don't believe, and I've said this to David Bose, who I have a ton of respect for. He's a great colleague. I don't think that is the right approach.
Yeah, I think it's disingenuous is what it comes down to. I would much rather someone attack me even unfairly than to actually pretend I don't exist. Like, oh, this North Korea book doesn't exist. It's like I can't wrap my head around that kind of thinking. Maybe it's from my like Russian upbringing.
Michael, let me jump in on this.
Please.
I think almost everybody who has this black legend idea of the Mises Institute is unaware that there's a Mises.org blog. Just visit that blog every day, and what will you find? Libertarian posting on standard topics in the lead up to the election.
And let me just say one more thing. It's not like there's all these like race and IQ posts, which are often, I think it's fairly say that this is code for racism. They're not there.
I think it would be funny to have a list of things you expect to find at the Mises Institute website and the list of things you actually find.
Right.
And in fact, leading up to the election, the balance of commentary was anti-Trump and pro-trade and everything else. I mean, it's not what people think.
Walter Block just this week had a piece in the New York Times. Walter Block urged libertarians to vote for Trump in a debate with Nick Gillespie. He had a piece in the Times this week attacking Trump on the tariffs in the Times.
Didn't he, in fact, at the end, not support Trump? Like he.
Well, it was just in the prime. I mean, he said you should vote for Gary Johnson ultimately. But he had a strategy of particular states what you ought to do. But my point is,
But no, the fact is, he went in the Times and he attacked Trump just recently.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
That is absolutely true. But the thing is, you go to the Mises Institute website, you go to any of the events. Like I was just at the Mises University program. That's where I learned Austrian economics. That's where Bob Murphy learned it. That's where Ben Powell, Ed
Judge
Stringham.
Napolitano spoke. Ed Stringham, who
all these young up-and-comers. Brian Kaplan went to Mises University. Even though he's not an Austrian, he still respects those people. So anyway, I went there. I mean, you look at the program, and it's things like the division of labor, money, monopoly theory, price theory. It's all technical economics. It's not any of the stuff people would. Or every year there's the Austrian Economics Research Conference. You look at what are the topics being covered. They're all highly technical economic papers. This is not the impression that you would get of the Mises Institute from the comment sections of a lot of libertarian websites, from a lot of libertarian commentary, from David Bose, for that matter, who, by the way, what a creep. When I met him, the one time I met him was out at Freedom Fest. We were both on a public television program, one after the other.
What kind of anarchist goes on public television?
Yeah,
I know. Where's
well,
your integrity?
I was on with Doug Casey. I mean, I'm not turning that down. Yeah, I'll throw all my principles in the trash to be on with Doug Casey. But when we met each other, he clearly knew who I was. He couldn't even look at me. I looked him right in the face and shook his hand. I mean, this is just silly stupidity. Like, we can't even be civil to each other. The other thing about Bose is the other day he attacked the Mises Caucus. And he's strongly implying that the Mises Caucus is alt-right and all that. And you, as a journalist, know full well that's not true. That if you read their platform, they could not be clearer about this. There's no connection between the alt-right and the Mises Caucus. The Mises Caucus just wants a radical libertarian party that places emphasis on certain Austrian themes like central banking. That's what the Mises Caucus is all about. And he attacked them on him, just a whole thing about, I can't believe the good name of Mises is being besmirched by what? By idealistic young kids who want to promote the ideas of Mises? So Michael Heiss, who's the founder of the Mises Caucus, said, look, why don't you here's my phone number. Call me. There's no reason for there to be this kind of division. You know what? Take a wild guess if Bose called. He doesn't. Do you think he wants to know the truth? I do not believe Bose is an honorable person. In this case, he clearly has an agenda. These people are outside his orbit. He's extremely territorial. So it doesn't mean anything that he's going to smear those people's names and engage in guilt by association with people who aren't associated with anything they should feel guilty about. That is just not acceptable. But there he is doing it. He has not taken it back. It's demonstrably false. Demonstrably false. That's how he is. And this is why, these sorts of things anger me. It's not fair that these are young, idealistic kids. They have no hidden agenda. They earn nothing. They are spending their own money to facilitate all this good work. And what do they get in return? They get this kind of abuse that is based in nothing from a guy like Bose, who apparently just does not. He attacked Jacob Hornberger from the Future Freedom Foundation, who is also outside his orbit. Steve Horwitz just jumped in on this recently because Hornberger, in a fundraising letter, said, in the 1800s, we had a lot of liberties that we don't have today. Doesn't he know about slavery? I mean, what IQ level are you at if you are going to do that to Jacob Hornberger?
He just brought up IQ.
115. It's 115. Those are the dangerous ones.
Yeah, those are the midwits.
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm sorry to be taking the whole thing over, but this makes me. Jacob Hornberger was extremely sound on foreign policy, even on 9/12/01. Even if it meant fundraise. No, hang on a minute.
You mean like when Ron Paul voted to allow George W. Bush to have that blank check?
No, it's a separate question. The point is that even if it meant fundraising dried up, even if it meant he was more isolated than ever, of all the people in the world to go after, when he said a thing that you obviously know what he means, that's just evil territorialism that Hornberger himself would never engage in. You look through Future Freedom Foundation for attacks on the Cato Institute. Pretty sure it'll come up like this.
I feel bad because David's not here to defend himself. You know what I mean?
Yeah, boo-hoo.
No, I mean, I think it's important to...
There is no defense to this. That's false. All right, then you know what, David Bose? I'm going to just say it right now. What you said about the Mises Caucus is false. Here's your opportunity to fix it. If you don't, then we'll know you're a loser. Okay? There it is.
Okay. I did not expect it to get this heated, to be honest.
Sorry.
I'm glad that you guys aren't getting heated at each other.
No, but this is I mean,
this is- wait,
I
hold on.
stand here
I'm gonna push
representing a
back.
lot of people who have been hurt by those people.
Let me push back because he does not have an obligation to respond. You're not going to say he has an obligation to respond. Nicholas Sarwark demanded that you sign a letter like saying, I denounce fascism. And you're like, are you kidding me? Like literally hold on, let me finish, please.
all right.
This isn't your show. He's like, literally every episode I have is denouncing the state and government, and fascism is the government at its worst. I'm not signing an extra piece of paper just because you snap your fingers. So he does not, in all fairness,
That's true.
owe you a
But
response.
the difference is that he started this one.
No,
he started
but
it.
What I'm saying is by him not engaging in this doesn't mean that he accepts your characterization of him. That's all I'm saying.
But it means that he now knows
Okay.
that he was wrong.
Okay.
And that he has smeared people.
Okay.
And if he's not going to correct that, that's a bad person. How else would you define that kind of behavior? Admirable?
I would not.
He should not have said that.
Let me hear what Matt
He
has
should
to
not
say.
have said that.
But my point. Let me just say. You asked
Yeah.
me a question. What I've said to you, and I've said publicly and probably many times. I'm a Big Ten person. We do not have a free country as free as it could be. And in my view, anyone who's trying to get in that direction, whether Reason or Mises, is my friend, and I don't go after them. So I would not do what he did. Period.
Right,
And
right.
my entire career has been testament to that. And there's only been one libertarian who's gone after me publicly, and he will be dead to me forever because I think that's so grotesque and gratuitous. Go ahead, Matt.
I'm old. Tom and I both had birthdays this week.
Yeah, within a
and
day of each other. It's a
I'm,
Christmas miracle.
I'm older than Tom here. I can exclusively reveal, so I'm a little bit less heated
in your dotage.
in my dotage.
I got to go take a nap after this much heat. I don't have the energy anymore.
Learned how to be calm about this. No, I mean, if I wanted to sit back and catalog the list of things that libertarians have said about me that are categorically untrue, including, and I'm not saying this is you, but the reason why you think that I supported the Iraq War is that there are 10 prominent libertarians who have accused me, despite there's no evidence of this, of supporting the Iraq War.
Well, you know why?
Wow.
I
Okay.
forgot it because you had something called War Blog.
Yes,
That's
of course.
so-
I invented this terrible word.
yeah.
whatever.
That's where I got conflated. So I
Wow.
apologize for mischaracterized you.
But life's too short to give a shit about that, as far as I'm concerned.
Sure.
Just from my own personal point of view. And part of being a public figure.
I was for the Iraq War. So I mean, this isn't me. I wanted blood. I wanted vengeance. So I'm not.
I can see you.
Yeah, I'm not. That wasn't me trying to attack you or mischaracterize.
No, I know.
you.
I know that. And I'm just saying that there are whole categories of. There is somewhere, and I think it's been lost, but we should all go look for it, or someone who's a good archivist. Do you ever see this animation that was made of me? I think it was an animation that of.
How could you be animated?
I was exactly, but I had like glasses on.
That's not nice.
And this came like in
You're next.
2008, 2009. And no, it shows me being hunted down by Mises Institute people. I'm not making this up. It's phenomenal. It is the greatest. I wish I could find it. Like I'm
Is
running.
it meant to be humorous?
Yes, but it's so weird. But I'm being Stephen Kinsella is like hunting me with a gun, I think, and I'm in a cabin, and it's nuts.
bizarre.
It is so good, and I think it's been lost to history. But people out there, if you're watching, where's the camera there?
If you can find it,
Please show it. So and it reflected a lot of people who were angry, particularly of our Ron Paul newsletter coverage and whatever other sins that we're seen to have made, and we've definitely made plenty of them, and I have too. And personally, I should stress all of that, but people have treated me unfairly all the time. I don't care. I don't care. It's part of being a public figure is that you're going to get that. So the question is, what do you do with it? Where do you go with it? And it's Luke Skywalker stuff at some point.
well, in terms of being attacked, that goes with the territory. If you're not doing anything worth doing, then you won't be attacked.
I'm
but
not
if you
really
are,
attacked. Everyone likes me. What'd you call
Not
it?
true.
Dave Rubin calls me the Willy Wonka of Liberty because I abuse children. Come to my
Well,
factory.
but look, you know what? Bob Higgs is a great example. Everybody in the libertarian world likes Bob Higgs. If you don't like Bob Higgs, there's something the matter with you. But he's the exception. The point, but even he is attacked by non-libertarians. The point is, you are going to be attacked. It used to be in the old days. I wasn't used to being attacked. So I would think, well, if there's a blog attacking me, why, I better show up in the comments section. When you're a kid, that's what you think to do. Today, I just feel like, yeah, all right, well, forget it. Nothing I can do about that.
Only on
except
Twitter.
keep churning out content. But Twitter's just fun. Twitter's just free for all. But when it's other people, when it's people I like, when it's the judge being attacked by Jon Stewart, or like whatever it is, that is what sort of makes me crazy. So I get animated these days when I'm defending myself. Not so much, not so animated. It's, oh, come on, for heaven's sake, look at all the stuff I've done, and if that's not good enough for you, okay, go on to some other libertarian. But if it's people, especially people who don't have the platform I have, who are just kids.
Yeah.
And they can't reach tens of thousands of people by just pressing the submit button on a podcast episode, then that does bother me, because when somebody who's in a position of authority with a big mailing list and a big following, when that person smears somebody who has no chance to respond, that's what gets me animated.
Okay. Yeah. Well, but there are all these, like, some of these kids are not idealistic. Some of these kids are not good people.
Maybe they're not, but the Mises Caucus people are indisputably good people.
Okay. That's well. And as you said, Matt covered it fairly.
Oh, I don't know about that. I mean, I didn't.
We would pick some nits, but it was certainly not.
It wasn't.
I didn't talk to Michael Hess. I didn't go there expecting to write what I wrote. I went there looking to see what stories were developing and why. And so, if I played it back, I would have spent more time, talking about these people, about this. I think a fundamental part of it was the first piece that I wrote sort of categorized it, oversimplified it as a Mises Caucus versus the pragmatists. And actually, Sarwark is personally a radical. I think he was co-founded the Radical Caucus there. So like he's a lawyer and a used car salesman and like
literally,
literally.
Yeah.
And is a very, very skilled with a gavel and kind of is a skilled politician within the party and all this kind of stuff. But personally, he's he gave, I think, one of the most goosebump inducing anti-war speeches I've ever seen in my life. For example, on election night in 2016 in New Mexico, as the results were coming in. It was a very interesting and passionate moment. Like, this is the message to the parties: stop your effing wars.
Yeah.
It was.
We're all agreed on that in this room.
It was terrific. But anyways, I think there are overlaps in groups, and I think the fundamental question, or a fundamental question, that doesn't have an answer is one that actually Tom posed in his speech, which is this: should the Libertarian Party go after 70 million votes? Or should it go after changing the way 1 million people think,
right?
The way that Ron Paul did. That tension has been at the Libertarian Party since it was founded. Is this an educational project, or is this an electoral vehicle? And of course, the answer is it's both. And people will find a way to muddle. And I don't know if you were in the room, but I chaired the vice chair debate, I moderated the vice chair debate, which included Arvind Vora, who's a real hardcore bomb thrower out there. And I quoted your question to all of them, the 5 candidates there, like, what's better? What would you go after? And most of them said versions of like, well, both. But Arvind ended up in a place that it's much more important to galvanize the 1 million. That tension hasn't resolved yet. And it's interesting.
What do you personally think? I think this is a no-brainer because the Founding Fathers, the Civil War, communism in Russia, these are all small cadres that have Goldwater campaign, Reagan campaign.
So there's what I think, and there's how I sort of position my own brain or comport my own self, and these things obviously influence each other and overlap. But Tom said something that I disagreed with in his speech, which is that policy doesn't matter. Or I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah, no,
here,
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Here, but I mean, it was like, think big picture. Let's change people's minds. Let's not get caught in weeds of incrementalism. I think incrementalism matters too. I like the fact that Jeff Hewitt, the mayor of Calamasa, California, has seized control of his own fire department from the San Bernardino and California state fire pension nightmare people and created a sort of a demonstration project of how you can get out between all the public sector unions in California. It's a totally important, totally small victory. Now he's running for County Board of Supervisors in Riverside, which would be a big deal. I like the fact that Laura Ebke, Libertarian state senator in Nebraska, passed occupational licensing reform. That's actually a big, small issue, and I want both things to happen. Is a way of saying this. So, and my example of this in the 2008 presidential campaign, there was one debate when Gary Johnson was still a libertarian that Ron Paul also participated. So it was a 40%, at least somewhat libertarian GOP debate. And the topic of legalizing marijuana came up. And of course, it went immediately to legalizing heroin. And Ron Paul's like, government has no use to, right to get in between you and what you want to put in your body.
And let's be clear, Ron Paul's an actual doctor, so this isn't just a politician talking.
And he also said, I had a great quote, and go look it up. It's really fun, his answer. But something like, you think if heroin was legal, everyone would be junkies tomorrow? Come on! Right? So that was his answer. Johnson, I think, who might have gone first, but it doesn't matter, really.
He was high all the time.
He wasn't as high then as he is now. Jeez. But he said, like, well, a cost-benefit analysis says that we're incarcerating too many people. It's costing too much money. You should do this. Both of them are right. Right. And I wrote a piece that said that I want both. I want the hardcore philosophical argument there, the first case, the moral case behind it. I also want the pragmatic case because I think that also works out. And
different people are persuaded differently.
And I want people to be working on those both of those problems, using both of those tactics at the same time. That I think creates an overall libertarian movement that's robust.
Today's episode is sponsored by Heshy Socks. That's HESHISOCKS.com. The most comfortable kick-ass fashion socks for work or play. And you guys know I take my socks seriously, so this is not just me blowing smoke. The problem with typical socks is that they're thin, provide no protection, they cause your feet to hurt if you're wearing those nice shoes, and they're overpriced. You go to stores at $30 a sock. Don't pay it. That's stupid. Here's what makes Heshy Socks different. They cut out the middleman, giving you high-quality, affordable socks that are cushioned in the footbed, the heel and the toe. It's like pillows for your feet, maximum comfort. They've got the arch support in the center of the foot, so like athletic socks, they stay secure, and they're made with high-end Pima cotton. Pima's super soft. It's highly breathable and absorbent if your feet sweat. They're antimicrobial. It kills the bacteria, keeps your feet from stinking. I don't have that problem, of course. So basically, they're helping you get laid when you take your shoes off. So they're offering different styles, basic, fashion, you name it. You can wear them with dress shoes, sneakers, or anything in between. Go to HeshySocks.com. That's HESHI Socks.com. Crazy comfortable, look great. And if you use promo code WELCOME30, you get 30% off. That's easy to remember. WELCOME30 at HeshySocks.com. I love these socks. Once again, that's WELCOME30 at HeshySocks.com. I've seen you come around to Matt's position in a couple ways. First of all, I had asked Matt in the past, what are you proudest of with your tenure at Reason? And one of the things you brought up was Rad DeBalco's work about the militarization of the police. And I don't even have to ask Tom. I'm sure you're a huge fan of that, and you regard this as a huge
I read
problem.
his book.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. There's no disagreement here. One of the things today on Twitter, someone was an anarchist, was engaging with you and telling you shouldn't get involved in elections whatsoever. Anarchists should basically pretend they don't exist. And you're like, but they do, and they do matter. So I'm not going to have this conversation. So you clearly acknowledge that maybe incrementalism doesn't make sense for me and Tom in the sense of tax cuts when we want to abolish the income tax, but in terms of smaller issues that are smaller than let's abolish the state, like the militarization of the police, licensing is another great example. These are minor tyrannies that libertarians can actually have major victories on.
Yeah, in fact, let me even... I think it would be a weasel word to say clarify my position. Maybe I'll even modify my position in light of what you say, because that's as good a case as I've ever heard. I'm not. I cheer all those developments as much as you do. If somehow we were able to get tax credits for homeschoolers or something, that would be, of course, I would favor a thing like that, even if we still had other government involvement in education. I guess my point rather is that it's the kind of thing, incrementalism in theory winds up being no change.
Well, no. You fucked up the quote. That's William Lloyd Garrison from my book, Ego and Hubris. He says incrementalism in theory means perpetuity in practice, and he was referring to abolitionism.
Right, because let's just keep slavery out of the territories.
Or then he's like, well, let's just treat the slaves better. It's like, this is going to never end it's asymptotic.
Well, and then that was exactly Rothbard's view and stuff like this. It wasn't that he would say, well, if you're not abolishing taxation, then I don't favor your 10% reduction. I do favor 10% reduction. But the thinking is, and this was what Tim Moen of the Libertarian Party of Canada said on my show, is that we can help bring the whole conversation in a particular direction by being that beacon that just demands everything. And if we get 3 to 5 to 8% of what we demand, that's a pretty good result. But if we start off by saying, well, the responsible thing would be to demand 3 to 5 to 8% of what we want, we'll get 0. That's the concern.
And Matt, I'm sure you don't disagree that people like Rand, Rothbard, and Ron Paul, you mentioned earlier, the 3 R's, I guess, by their, I'll use the pejoratives, let's say zealotry and their vision, which is never going to happen, that when you're young especially, that does put a fire in your belly and be like, you know what, I'm never going to get to Zion, but at least I want to be on the road. Whereas when you have different articles about discrete issues, it's very hard for a young person to kind of put it into a coherent whole, and even if they are put into a coherent whole, to be galvanized by it.
I mean, just think about the difference in reaction to Ron Paul and Rand Paul. Ron Paul, who's defending a completely arbitrarily, drawn district in Texas. I mean, that district is amazing.
It's drawn to hurt him, it seems.
I wouldn't be surprised about that at all. Over the years, Rand has to defend a state electorate in Kentucky that went, I think, 30 percentage points to Donald Trump, incidentally. And so from the beginning, I mean, part of it is that people affix themselves to Ron Paul very, very strongly. And so any sort of departure from it by even among his own kin who lives with him at the time. I mean, Rand Paul was beaten up by a lot of libertarians when he was running, even in the primary in 2010. I recall, but also Rand's project is totally different. It doesn't galvanize people in the same way. Occasionally, he's had moments that he totally broke through. In 2013, 2013 was Rand Paul's year. It was great. It was a very libertarian year in general on many senses, and then it all crashed and burned. But like, it's a different project that he's doing. He is dealing in much more kind of electoral reality. You can see him triangulating. He's really bad about hiding that stuff or making it like slick, which I kind of credit him for being bad at that. But it made him not a particularly palatable presidential candidate for sure in a year that everyone wanted to go towards kind of perceived authenticity. But those are just really different projects, and you're right to focus on young people. I think there's people want a very black and white kind of world. They want life and death. They when you're young, I mean, when you can get to some kind of area of purity of thought. I remember seeing Ron at a small gathering in like Virginia, DC suburbs, for the Young Americans for Liberty, and he used a phrase which on some levels curdled my spine, because this is not where I come from. But his message to them was perfect your ideology. Yeah. Right. And I'm someone who, since I lived in Central Europe for a long time, when I hear someone talk about perfecting ideology, I'm like, okay, here we go, strap in.
Here comes the gulag, right?
But that is attractive to a young person in a way that, hey, let's get, backpack school choice funding to follow the kid doesn't necessarily galvanize people. I just argue that you need both. My temperament as a squish, as a journalist, as someone who is constantly talking in the world that we live in, the way that people talk about the world that we live in. I'm on MSNBC 3 times a week, right? So like, I could answer every single question on there when they say, well, what about, this regulation? Like, there should never be a regulation because government should be abolished. Like, you're not going to spend a lot of conversations going that direction. So I like both.
And also, though, in your defense, having spent time in the former Czechoslovakia, you under no misconceptions about how bad government can actually be, and that this is not like, oh, you're a communist, it's just difference of opinion. When they're sending in the tanks, you are going to be as hardcore as Rothbard on these issues.
And it's not just about tanks. To be absolutely clear about this, and this is, where, compared to a normal person, my thinking is radicalized on some level. It's how it damaged everybody's brains.
Yes.
Like the phrase when we lived there, to explain everything, you had to say 40 years of communism. It warped everybody, every single transaction. You buying a brick, you were affected by 40 years of communist propaganda and the system that propagated it. It is so incredibly appalling.
Can you just say evil instead of appalling?
It's evil.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's evil. I remember I was a college student when Ronald Reagan called it the evil empire, and the snarky college students like, yeah. And I might have been one of those college students. And the one thing that I wanted to apologize to Reagan for after living there was like, no, that underestimated it. It was more than evil.
Because the pervasiveness.
Yes.
I already forgot. Do you think you're going to get... I want to ask you both. I'll ask you first. Do you think you're going to get crap from people for sitting down with Matt?
I hope not. First of all, my folks, I think the fact that some of them are joining the LP just because I did means some of them trust my judgment. But also, I think a lot of us, at least certainly as I enter or, let's say, continue through middle age, I personally have lost my appetite for unnecessary confrontation. Necessary confrontation I'll have, but
Sure.
it's almost always because I'm on the receiving end, and or my friends are on the receiving end, and I don't wake up and say, "Time to do my podcast. Let's see what the SOBs over at this libertarian institution are up to." It would never even remotely occur to me, and I feel like some of my people feel the same way. That if there is possibility, at least to be cordial with one another and to try to work out areas where there might have been I don't know, unnecessary hostility or misunderstandings, then I think it's wrong of you not to make that kind of effort. And plus, Michael Malice tells me Matt Welch is a good guy, and that is almost all I need to know.
I can't believe
Yeah.
that endorsement goes anywhere in this world. It's very
Well,
very
it's
troubling.
not as good as the endorsement when they tried to get me on the Independence, and you said you weren't sure I was TV ready.
Did I say that?
Yeah.
That's awesome. I was so wrong. That's great. But did I know you well enough to make that judgment?
You just need to look at me for 2 seconds, motherfucker.
Great, now I got to bleep
Never
this out.
forget- Okay, now it's time for the real argument.
Quality control. That's great.
No, but there is an asymmetry because, like Tom had said earlier, it's easy for him to reach out to reason, but there seems to have been, maybe not reason per se, not a lack of reciprocity reaching out to Tom. So do you think you're going to get heat for sitting down? I actually didn't tell anyone about this because I was scared you're going to get talked out of it. Not that I don't think you have integrity,
No,
but
I mean,
I thought you'd get shit for it necessarily.
There is, whenever there's sort of anyone who has perceived any amount of pull anywhere in the world, not that people exaggerate reason's importance, but we've been around 50 years. We have a circulation of 50,000. We're in the world.
You're the gateway drug. That's how I always describe it. You guys serve such an important purpose.
That we have been, and that's the greatest thing about being an editor, even a former editor of it, is that you go to conventions where there's lots of libertarians, and you hear, like someone, I first picked it up. I met a guy in Vegas at Freedom Fest, wonderful, wonderful guy, who found reason in the back of a airplane seat flying in Mexico in 1983 as a 13-year-old.
Yeah.
And that changed his entire life.
And I think a lot of people in this whole broad liberty movement forget that for the vast majority of people, they don't think this is an option. They think it's a binary. Like if I ever attack Hillary on Twitter, all the Republicans, like what I'm saying. But if I ever attack Trump, they're like, oh, you typical New York blue state journalist.
Right.
And it's like, because they have this binary worldview, and it's shocking to see it happen. And this is you can hate them both. You know what I mean? It's like there's other choices, and when people, it's liberating for them to be like, oh, I don't have to drink Coke or Pepsi.
Yeah, I mean, we played that John Stossel tells a pretty good canned story.
He's going to be on this show in a couple of weeks.
Oh, cool.
I cannot wait.
I mean, his conversion story reason
Yeah.
plays a big role in that, which is all fine and good. I don't think anyone's going to give a crap about me sitting with Tom Woods. I think that the idea that we tend to imagine that an institution has a position on a person or a group or a thing. Like you mentioned earlier, that Gary Johnson's our favorite person. I would dispute that. I think that we have some kind of similar squishiness. Let's say we're probably more pragmatically oriented than a lot of libertarians. I like Gary a lot as a person. Last time I saw him, I gave him a hug.
Sure.
I'm not very huggy anymore. And I beat him up all the time for his performance during the campaign and some of the choices that he's made.
And in Gary Johnson's defense, he's getting news coverage. You know what I mean? And some of these Justin Amash gets news coverage, Rand Paul gets news coverage. So it's a lot easier to get news coverage when the media can wrap their heads around it.
But like I can testify from being inside the belly of the beast, there hasn't been a Tom Woods policy. There hasn't been.
Nor did I think there was.
But just like
but I thought beneath the surface there was something fishy about.
Not
this
our kind
guy.
of people.
Yeah, not our kind of people.
Yeah, I mean, just the we're lucky in that, and it's very unusual in the world of journalism to like. If I wanted to go, and for instance, David Koch is a member of our board of trustees. If I wanted to go tomorrow and write something about David Koch, I would have free reign to do it. No one would. Positive, negative, whatever. Like I had to cover the Koch-Cato feud, talk about something we don't want to talk about for 25 minutes. And I said, okay, I'll volunteer for that job. I have no problem doing it. And I know that I will have the freedom to do that. There really isn't a strong line.
Well, I'm just saying, I think Tom's position, or at least my perceived position, there's a difference between criticizing and dismissively ignoring and pretending, these people are beneath us or they don't exist and they don't really matter, which is not your position. Obviously.
Yeah. And I don't think, obviously everybody, institutions have their own kind of lean or their own habits, their own muscle memories, and I won't, dispute that those might have practical impacts that end up looking like it's an organized intelligence. But incompetence is always, is one of the
never
early...
ascribe to malice, which can be ascribed to incompetence. Yeah.
Michael Malice, that is.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, and Reason gave me my book party for Dear Reader, and that went fabulously well. And John Tierney interviewed me, and it was just something I'm very grateful for. And it was, again, let's also give some more background. Reason got its name from Ayn Rand, and because she kept talking about
and
Reason.
then she tried to sue us.
Did she?
Yeah. It's a great
I love
story.
her. Oh my! I love her so much. I love her so much.
Does she have some proprietary control
Oh
over
yeah,
the word
she
reason?
sued a book which had there was a reviewer that said this book reads like Ayn Rand or something like that. She sued because you don't have a right to my name because she was very big on IP.
Oh,
Yeah, but that's insane on IP. Like, that doesn't even make sense.
Oh, she's insane on IP. Absolutely insane on IP.
Yeah, and there's a great
Well, because
video-
she's implying that you're stealing my endorsement.
There's a video interview with Manny Klausner, one of the Reason kind of co-founders, or when they took it over from the original founder of the magazine back in 1971, and he studied with Murray Rothbard, a great friend of his. But he really wanted Rand to sue Reason because he wanted the headline Rand sues Reason.
Yeah. Rand versus Reason. Yeah. Wait, how did she threaten? Do you remember? And tell me the story. This is fascinating history.
I'm going to mess it up.
Okay, sure.
Exactly. So just go and look. It's on YouTube. It's on the Reason site. Look for Manny Klausner, Klausner, talking about it. It's very funny.
Okay, we're running out of time. I'm going to ask Tom a question.
Okay.
Would you have any issues having Matt on your show? I'm putting you on the spot.
If he wants to come on, I'd be glad to have Matt on the show.
Okay.
Done.
And I'm
Done
by
and
the way,
done.
And I'm sure Camille would love to have him on We the Fifth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Next time you're in New York.
I guess I just feel like for the folks who I have 1,207 podcast episodes now as of this. Yeah, it's unbelievable. And I feel like if people, I don't say you have to listen to all 1207, but believe it, there are crazy people who have. I assure you, the crazy people.
Don't insult them. That's not nice, Tom.
That's why I'm whispering. But if you listen to them, you get a sense of, all right, well, let's see. I mean, Woods favors, and it's all well, that's pretty much every libertarian thing. And I got a little upset today because I feel like I've had all this stuff building up over the years and what I've seen happen. But I think they feel like my persona is pleasant. I'm not doing gotcha journalism. I'm not trying to make people uncomfortable. I mean, I will play a hard devil's advocate sometimes, but nobody leaves my show feeling like, wow, that guy was just out to abuse me.
Amiable. Your vibe is amiable.
Yeah,
Yes.
It's the opposite of what people would think based on the Black Legend version. So in any case, yeah, I'd be quite happy to do it. We'll come up with some fun topics. And how about this, Michael? You're like the Donald Trump here. And
I'm fixing the career problem.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm fixing the liberty movement problem.
That's right.
I'll speak to it based on what you were talking about Czechoslovakia. Coming from a Soviet background, you have a grotesque, disproportionate respect for loyalty. Because if you're living, and I'm guessing here, you're living in a country where you have to be suspicious of everyone, even people you grew up with, because you don't know when they've turned into the KGB. And this also speaks to how pernicious communism is. You don't know. I talked to us with Kathy Young. She was my guest a few weeks ago. You don't know who you can trust because at any moment, not only are they going to be snitching on you, they're going to be setting you up so that they can snitch on you, being like, hey, I got these black market sweaters. You want some? Like, oh, okay, this is my childhood friend. Next thing you know, you're out of a job or something like that. So for me, again, I've spent time with you and your family, When you like and respect people and get along with them, it bothers me on a fundamental level that there wouldn't be more than cordial, because you're fighting the same fight, that there wouldn't be some collegiality, and that there wouldn't be like this open let me email
Open
you
borders?
Oh yeah, open borders.
Well,
Now that I'm here, we don't need
Let's
any
say
more
there
open
are people
borders.
who are fighting the fight in different ways.
Yeah.
And some of them, I say, that's fighting the fight in a weird way
But
that
I
I just
just
can't
also mean-
endorse.
I don't even
but I
mean
don't
that.
go out of my way to...
But I mean on a personality level.
Yeah.
I knew that neither of you are hotheads and axe to grind types.
Just whisper David Bowes into Tom's ear.
I know.
Yeah.
Sorry. There are a few names
beard
that make
starts
me
shining.
crazy.
That was
Michael.
so. Do you want to explain why you have the beard on? Because
Oh, yeah. I have a case of something called pseudofolliculitis Barbie.
which is not contagious.
No, that's right. And so that's why if I were growing a beard, I would actually shave the neck area. But it's that you have to grow the whiskers out to get past
What
this
is
condition.
this? What is this leprosy that you have?
It has to do with ingrowing beard whiskers, and you got to just make them resolve themselves.
Okay.
So it's my own. It has nothing to do with the razors I endorse. It's my own fault. But so that now I have to look like this on your show.
I'm really glad this went as well as it did, and I'm really glad that this happened. And I hope, and this is going to sound pompous, and I don't care because that's my brand. I hope that young people and people who are watching the show will take a breath before they start going after people from maybe another wing of the same movement, and have them give them the benefit of the doubt and engage with them on their ideas, and not get vituperative and think this person is either a crazy person or a coward, which they're not.
I just can't believe that we've come to see Michael Malice as a hippie. It's really it's exciting for me.
To quote Donahue, Ayn Rand was on Donahue, and a woman got up and said, "This is one of my favorite moments in libertarianism. I used to agree with you, but now that I'm more educated, I don't." And Rand goes, "Now this is what I don't answer." And Rand goes, "You haven't heard her question." Donahue goes, "You haven't heard her question." Guy goes, "She's already put her intelligence above mine, incidentally displaying the quality of her brain." And Donahue's like, "Let her ask." And she asked the question, and Rand goes, "I do not answer anyone who's impolite, but if someone wants to ask the question politely, I'll answer it." And Donahue goes, "You're attacking this woman for her passion." She goes, "I do not sanction impoliteness, and I am not the victim of hippies." And he goes, "Hippies, that's where it started, the dropping of manner." It's on YouTube. Wow, beautiful.
There has never been anyone like that woman.
And why that's not the best moment of that episode, the best moment is when a housewife gets up and says, "Isn't it true that your book was written by the Illuminati?" Oh. The who? The Illuminati? It's like that to me, honestly, is the greatest moment of libertarian history. This is the second greatest moment in libertarian history. I will see you all next week. Thank you so much. You are welcome.